Your alarm goes off, and the first thought that arrives is not gratitude. It is dread, for the boss who never appreciates you, the partner who never listens, the body that never cooperates, the bank account that never grows fast enough. You lie there for a moment, cataloging everyone and everything responsible for the life you did not choose. We have all done this. Somewhere along the way, most of us built a quiet internal courtroom where circumstances, other people, and bad luck sit permanently in the defendant's chair. And we sit in the judge's seat, delivering the same verdict every morning. None of this is my fault. Here is what that verdict costs. It costs momentum. It costs the relationships that could have been repaired by one honest conversation. It costs the version of your career, your body, your peace of mind that was always available, but never claimed. Every day spent assigning blame is a day not spent building a different life. But there is a shift available to you, one sentence long. The moment you stop asking who did this to you, you can start asking what you are going to do about it. That shift is where we are headed. I want to say something to you before we go any further. Wherever you are starting from, whether you have spent years blaming a parent, an ex, an economy, or a diagnosis for the life you are living, you are not broken, and you have not started too late. You have simply been using a map that was never going to get you where you want to go. Let me name what this has actually looked like in your life. You replay old arguments and rehearse what you should have said. You watch other people build businesses, relationships, and bodies you want, and you quietly explain to yourself why your situation is different, harder, unfair. You feel the small, sharp sting of noticing that another year has passed, and the same promises to yourself remain unkept. This is not weakness. This is what a life spent outsourcing responsibility feels like from the inside. This audiobook exists to hand you something different. Over the next several chapters, you are going to learn how to identify the exact moments you quietly hand your power to circumstances outside your control, and how to take it back. Not through willpower alone, but through a specific, repeatable practice of ownership that people like Nelson Mandela and Viktor Frankl used to remain free even in literal captivity. This is not about blaming yourself instead of everyone else. Self-blame is just victimhood wearing a different mask. What we are building is something sturdier. The calm, clear-eyed ownership of your choices, your reactions, and your next move, regardless of what has already happened to you. By the final chapter, you will not just understand radical accountability as an idea. You will have a working blueprint for applying it the next time life hands you a reason to quit. So let us begin. Right where you are, exactly as you are, the door is open, and I am walking through it with you. Chapter 1. The story you keep telling yourself. She sat across from a journalist decades ago and said something that reframed her entire life. No one had given her a talk show, a network, or an empire. She had built it from a childhood defined by poverty and abuse, one decision at a time. Oprah Winfrey did not deny what happened to her. She simply refused to let it write the rest of the story. We all carry a story about why our life looks the way it does. Some of that story is true. Real things happen to us that were not our fault. But somewhere inside every story of what happened to us, there is a second story hiding. The one about what we decided to do next. Most of us stop narrating right after the first story and never get to the second one. Here is what I have come to understand, and what psychologists confirm again and again. The human mind is a meaning-making machine, and it will hand you whichever meaning is easiest to live with. Blame is easy because it requires nothing further from you. Ownership is harder because it demands a next move. Oprah's story only became a story of triumph the day she stopped narrating herself as the girl things happened to, and started narrating herself as the woman who happened to her circumstances. You have a version of this in your own life right now. Maybe it is the job you did not get, the relationship that ended, the year that fell apart. You have told that story so many times it has hardened into fact. This is just who I am. This is just what my life is. But notice something. You chose which parts to include and which parts to leave out. You are, whether you know it or not, already the author. You have simply been writing yourself as a side character. Here is something you can do in the next 10 minutes. Take the story you tell most often about why your life is the way it is, the one you tell friends, or tell yourself at 2 a.m., write it down in 3 sentences. Then rewrite it in 3 different sentences, this time starting every sentence with I chose or I am choosing instead of it happened or they did. Read both versions out loud. Notice which one makes you feel like a passenger and which one makes you feel like a driver. Say this to yourself and mean it. I am not the character things happen to. I am the author deciding what happens next. Because once you can see the story you have been telling, you can finally ask the harder question. Who has actually been holding the pen the whole time? Chapter 2: The Blame Trap. A Roman emperor once wrote, late at night, in a journal never meant for anyone else's eyes, that it is not events that disturb people, but their judgments about events. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire during plagues, betrayals, and wars, and still found time to remind himself of one uncomfortable truth. The emperor of the known world could not control what happened to him, only what he did with it. We reach for blame the way we reach for a coat in the cold. It is fast, it is familiar, and for a moment, it keeps something painful away from our skin. Blame lets us feel the sting of a bad outcome without feeling the deeper sting of having played a part in it. So we blame the traffic, the economy, the ex, the parent, the algorithm, and for a moment it works. The discomfort goes quiet. Here is what I have learned the hard way, and what Marcus Aurelius understood 2,000 years before modern psychology gave it a name. Blame relieves pain in the short term and manufactures powerlessness in the long term. Every time you blame something outside yourself, you are quietly telling your own mind that the solution is also outside yourself, which means you have just talked yourself out of being able to fix it. The relief is real. So is the trap. Consider how differently your week would run if, every time something went wrong, your very next thought was not, whose fault is this, but what part of this is mine to fix? Not to punish yourself, to locate your leverage. A missed deadline stops being your manager's unreasonable timeline and becomes a conversation you did not have soon enough. A fight with your partner stops being their tone and becomes the moment you chose silence instead of honesty 3 days earlier. Here is a tool you can use the next time you feel blame rising in your chest. Pause and ask yourself one question, out loud if you can. If I could not blame anyone or anything for this, what would I do next? That single question strips blame of its power within seconds, because it forces your mind out of the courtroom and back onto the road. Blame feels like power and behaves like a cage. The next time something goes wrong in your life, you are going to notice the exact moment you reach for that coat, and you are going to have a choice about whether to put it on. Chapter 3: Circumstances are not sentences. A psychiatrist was stripped of everything a human being can be stripped of: his family, his possessions, his freedom, even his name, replaced with a number tattooed on his arm. And in that place, Viktor Frankl noticed something the guards could never take from him: the space between what happened to him and how he chose to respond to it. He called that space the last of the human freedoms, and he built an entire body of work proving that even in a concentration camp, meaning and choice remained available. We tend to treat our circumstances as if they were sentences, fixed, final, handed down by a judge with no appeal. I lost my job, so I am unemployable. I was raised without money, so I will always struggle with money. I was hurt, so I am someone who gets hurt. Each of these statements takes something that happened and quietly converts it into something that defines you permanently. Here is what I want you to understand, and what Frankel's life proved under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Circumstances are information, not instructions. They tell you what you are working with. They do not tell you what you are capable of building from it. The gap between an event and your response to it is where every version of your future actually gets decided. Think about the last time something outside your control went wrong. A diagnosis, a layoff, a breakup you did not choose. Somewhere inside that experience was a moment where you unconsciously decided what it meant about you and your future. You may not have noticed the decision being made. It happens quickly, almost automatically. But it happened, and it can be made again, differently right now. Here is your tool for the next 10 minutes. Take one circumstance you have been treating as a permanent sentence. Something you say, "That's just how it is," about. Write down the circumstance in one line. Then write down, underneath it, 3 different meanings you could choose to assign to it instead of the one you have been carrying. You are not lying to yourself. You are simply refusing to accept the first, laziest interpretation as the only true one. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Drop your answer in the comments right now. What is one circumstance in your life you have been treating as a permanent sentence instead of information you can work with? I read every comment, and your answer might shape the next audiobook we create together. Frankel found freedom in the worst place a human being can be. You get to practice finding yours somewhere far less extreme, but the muscle is the same one, and it is time to start using it. Chapter 3: Circumstances are not sentences. A psychiatrist was stripped of everything a human being can be stripped of: his family, his possessions, his freedom, even his name, replaced with a number tattooed on his arm. And in that place, Viktor Frankl noticed something the guards could never take from him: the space between what happened to him and how he chose to respond to it. He called that space the last of the human freedoms, and he built an entire body of work proving that even in a concentration camp, meaning and choice remained available. We tend to treat our circumstances as if they were sentences, fixed, final, handed down by a judge with no appeal. I lost my job, so I am unemployable. I was raised without money, so I will always struggle with money. I was hurt, so I am someone who gets hurt. Each of these statements takes something that happened and quietly converts it into something that defines you permanently. Here is what I want you to understand, and what Frankel's life proved under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Circumstances are information, not instructions. They tell you what you are working with. They do not tell you what you are capable of building from it. The gap between an event and your response to it is where every version of your future actually gets decided. Think about the last time something outside your control went wrong: a diagnosis, a layoff, a breakup you did not choose. Somewhere inside that experience was a moment where you unconsciously decided what it meant about you and your future. You may not have noticed the decision being made. It happens quickly, almost automatically. But it happened, and it can be made again, differently right now. Here is your tool for the next 10 minutes. Take one circumstance you have been treating as a permanent sentence. Something you say, "That's just how it is," about. Write down the circumstance in one line. Then write down, underneath it, 3 different meanings you could choose to assign to it instead of the one you have been carrying. You are not lying to yourself. You are simply refusing to accept the first, laziest interpretation as the only true one. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Drop your answer in the comments right now. What is one circumstance in your life you have been treating as a permanent sentence instead of information you can work with? I read every comment, and your answer might shape the next audiobook we create together. Frankl found freedom in the worst place a human being can be. You get to practice finding yours somewhere far less extreme, but the muscle is the same one, and it is time to start using it. Chapter 4: The Excuse Machine. A young lawyer lost election after election, failed in business, and buried a fiancée before he ever set foot in the White House. Abraham Lincoln had, by any honest measure, more material for excuses than most people will ever accumulate. He used almost none of them. He kept running, kept building, kept trying again, not because his losses were not real, but because he refused to let them become his final word. Here is something worth being honest about. An excuse is not a lie exactly. It is usually built from a true fact. I am tired, I had a hard childhood. The market really is difficult right now. The problem is not that excuses are false. The problem is that they are true and unhelpful at the same time, and we have trained ourselves to stop the sentence right there instead of continuing it into action. I have watched people, myself included, build what I call an excuse machine, a mental factory that manufactures a fresh, plausible, defensible reason every single time we do not do the thing we said we would do. The machine is efficient. It never runs out of raw material, because there is always a real reason available. Lincoln's excuse machine could have produced material for a lifetime. He chose, over and over, not to let it run. Here is what this looks like in your actual life. You did not go to the gym because you were exhausted after work. True, and also not the reason you have missed 12 sessions this month. You did not send the email because you did not want to seem pushy. True, and also the same story you told yourself last month, and the month before that. The excuse is not fake. It is just no longer allowed to be the final answer. Here is your practice. The next time you catch yourself giving a reason for not doing something, do not argue with the reason. It is probably true. Instead, say this sentence immediately after it out loud. That is true, and I am doing it anyway, starting with the smallest possible version of it right now. Then do the smallest possible version in the next 10 minutes, no matter how small. You are allowed to have real reasons. You are not required to let them be your last word. Lincoln's excuses were as valid as anyone's ever have been, and history remembers what he did after he acknowledged them, not the excuses themselves. Chapter 5: Owning Your Reactions. Researchers studying what separates high performers from everyone else around them kept finding the same thing showing up again and again, in leadership, in relationships, in careers that lasted versus careers that collapsed. It was not intelligence. It was not talent. Daniel Goleman spent years documenting it and gave it a name that changed how the business world thinks about success. Emotional intelligence. The ability to notice your own reaction before it controls you. Here is the part of accountability nobody warns you about. It is one thing to own your choices. It is a much harder thing to own your reactions. The sharp comment you fired back, the silence you used as a weapon, the panic that made you quit before you even tried. Most of us treat our reactions as things that happen to us, the same way we treat the weather. He made me angry. She made me shut down. It stressed me out. I have come to believe this is one of the most expensive lies we tell ourselves, and Goleman's research backs it up directly. Your reaction is not an event. It is a choice made so quickly you have stopped noticing you are making it. The half-second between a trigger and your response is small, but it is real, and it is entirely yours. Nobody can make you angry. They can create conditions. What you do inside those conditions is still authored by you. Think about the last time you snapped at someone you love, or went cold on someone who needed you present. In the moment, it felt automatic, almost involuntary. But somewhere in that half-second, a decision was made to raise your voice instead of lower it, to withdraw instead of stay. That decision happened so fast it felt like weather. It was not weather. It was you. Here is a tool you can use today. The next time you feel a reaction rising, anger, defensiveness, the urge to shut down, physically pause and count to 5 before you speak or act. Use those 5 seconds to ask one question. What response would the person I am trying to become choose right now? 5 seconds is enough to move a reaction from automatic to authored. You cannot always choose what happens to you. You can always, without exception, choose what you do in the half-second after. That half-second, practiced daily, is where an entire different life gets built. Chapter 6, From Character to Author. He spent 27 years in prison for the crime of demanding equality, and when he finally walked free, the world expected rage. Nelson Mandela gave South Africa something else entirely, a demonstration that a person can be denied everything except the choice of who they decide to become inside the walls they did not choose. He did not walk out as a victim who had been freed. He walked out as the author of what came next, and he had clearly been writing the whole time. Here is a distinction worth sitting with. A character is someone things happen to. An author is someone who decides what the things that happen will mean and what comes after them. Every human being alive has been, at some point, a character in a chapter they did not choose. An illness, a betrayal, a loss, a childhood. The question radical accountability asks is not whether painful chapters happen to you. It asks whether you are still living as a character inside them, or whether you have picked up the pen. I want you to notice something about the identity you have been carrying. If you introduce yourself, even silently to yourself, as someone who always gets left, someone who never catches a break, or someone who is just not built for success, you are not describing your past. You are writing your next chapter using the same handwriting as your last one. Mandela's 27 years could easily have produced a man defined by bitterness. Instead, he used them to write a different identity, one decision at a time, long before anyone else could see it. This shows up in smaller ways in your life than a prison cell. It shows up in the job interview you talk yourself out of, because I'm not the kind of person who gets picked. It shows up in the relationship you sabotage, because I'm not the kind of person people stay for. Every one of those sentences is a character's line. An author's line sounds different. I am the kind of person who is currently building the skills to get picked, to be stayed for, to be chosen. If what you are hearing is already shifting something inside you, subscribe to this channel right now and hit the notification bell, because the next audiobook goes even deeper into how to rebuild your identity after the moment's life has broken you down. You do not want to miss it. Here is your practice for today. Write one sentence that starts with "I am someone who," describing the identity your past would hand you by default. Then write the authored version, the identity you are choosing to build starting now, regardless of what has already happened. Read the authored version every morning this week until it stops feeling like fiction. You did not choose every chapter of this book. From this moment forward, you choose who is holding the pen. Chapter 7: The Discipline of Radical Honesty. A researcher spent years studying shame, courage, and the stories people tell themselves to avoid looking directly at their own part in their pain. Brené Brown found something uncomfortable and true in her work. The people who lived the most wholehearted lives were not the ones with the least pain. They were the ones willing to own their part in it, out loud, without the armor of blame or the collapse of self-hatred. Here is the honest problem with everything we have covered so far. It is possible to nod along with the idea of accountability while quietly exempting yourself from the one place it actually matters. The specific relationship, the specific failure, the specific pattern you already know is yours. We can intellectually agree with radical accountability and still refuse to apply it to the one thing that would actually change our life. I have noticed this in myself, and Brown's research names it precisely. Honesty about our own role in our outcomes requires tolerating a discomfort most of us spend our whole lives avoiding. It is easier to say, "I take responsibility for my life," in general than to say, "I am the reason that friendship ended," in particular. General accountability costs nothing. Specific accountability costs your pride, and it is the only kind that produces change. Think about one relationship, one habit, or one recurring failure in your life that you already privately suspect has more of your fingerprints on it than you have admitted out loud. You know which one. It surfaced in your mind the moment I said, "You already know which one." That flicker of recognition is not an accident. It is the truth trying to get your attention. Here is your tool. Say the specific, uncomfortable sentence out loud, alone, right now, in this 10 minutes. Not the general version, the specific one. Not, "I could communicate better," but, "I ended that friendship by disappearing instead of being honest." Not, "I could manage money better," but, "I spent that money to avoid feeling the discomfort of saving it." Naming it specifically out loud is the exact moment shame loses its grip and change becomes possible. Radical honesty with yourself is not self-punishment. It is the door that self-punishment has been standing in front of, pretending to be the only way through. Chapter 8: Moving Before You Feel Ready. He was cut from his high school varsity basketball team as a sophomore, sent home to sit with a disappointment most people would have let define them. Michael Jordan did not wait to feel ready, confident, or fully healed from that rejection before he went back to the gym the next morning. He built one of the greatest careers in the history of sport on a decision made while the sting was still fresh, not after it had comfortably faded. Here is something accountability requires that most people quietly hope to skip: action before readiness. We tell ourselves we will start the business once we feel confident, start the relationship once we have healed fully, start the harder conversation once we are calm enough to have it perfectly. Readiness, in this form, almost never arrives on schedule. It usually arrives after the action, not before it. I have come to see this as one of the sturdiest patterns in every accountable life I have studied. Jordan did not feel ready the morning after being cut. He felt humiliated. He went to the gym anyway, and the readiness, the confidence, the skill, the identity of a champion was built by the action, not waited for before it. Waiting for readiness treats confidence as a precondition. It is actually a byproduct. Think about the thing you have been waiting to feel ready for. The conversation, the application, the apology, the workout, the finished draft. Notice how much of your waiting has quietly become another form of the excuse machine we named earlier, wearing the more respectable disguise of, I just want to do this properly. Properly, eventually, always costs you the version of yourself that could have started today. Here is your tool for the next 10 minutes. Take the one thing you have been waiting to feel ready for and do the smallest, most imperfect possible version of it right now. The first messy sentence of the email, the first minute of the workout, the first honest line of the conversation. Said out loud to yourself if no one else is there yet. You are not aiming for readiness. You are aiming for motion, because motion is what manufactures readiness, not the reverse. Jordan built a legacy out of a rejection he did not wait to recover from before he acted. You do not need to feel ready. You need to start, and the readiness will meet you on the way. Chapter 9. Building the Unshakable Life. A man who built one of the largest fortunes in modern history was once asked the secret to his decades of consistent decision-making through recessions, crashes, and public failures that would have derailed most people's confidence. Warren Buffett gave an answer that had nothing to do with predicting markets and everything to do with a personal rule he never broke. Know your own circle of competence, take responsibility for your own decisions inside it, and never blame the market for a choice you made. Here is what all 8 chapters before this one have been building toward. Accountability is not a single dramatic decision made once. It is a structure, a set of daily practices, checked and repeated, the way Buffett checked the same principles before every decision for 60 years without exception. An unshakable life is not built from willpower spikes. It is built from a small number of non-negotiable practices, followed on the ordinary days as faithfully as the hard ones. I want to bring together everything we have covered into something you can actually carry. Notice the story you are telling about your circumstances, and rewrite the parts that are yours to author. Refuse the code of blame, even when it is cold and it is right there. Treat circumstances as information, not sentences. Let your excuses be true and still act anyway. Own your reactions in the half-second they are made in. Pick up the pen on your own identity. Tell yourself the specific, uncomfortable truth out loud. Move before you feel ready. Each one of these repeated is what an unshakable life is actually made of. Here is what this looks like in your ordinary week. It is not a single accountability speech you give yourself once and never revisit. It is Tuesday morning, noticing the excuse rising, and doing the smallest version anyway. It is Thursday evening, catching the blame before it leaves your mouth, and asking the harder question instead. It is nobody watching, and choosing the accountable version regardless. Here is your tool, and it is the one meant to outlast this audiobook. Choose one accountability practice from everything we have covered. The pause before reacting, the specific honest sentence, the smallest imperfect action, and attach it to something you already do every single day, like brushing your teeth or making coffee. Practice daily. In that small attached moment, it becomes structural instead of occasional, the way Buffett's rules became structural instead of occasional. If this audiobook is adding real value to your life, do not keep it to yourself. Share it with one person who needs to hear this today. You might not realize it, but that one share could genuinely change someone's life. An unshakable life was never built on a single perfect day. It was built the way Buffett built his fortune. The same sound decision, repeated on ordinary Tuesdays nobody was watching. Chapter 10. The End of Playing the Victim. Your alarm goes off, and for a moment, the old thought tries to arrive first. The boss, the partner, the body, the bank account, all lining up in that familiar courtroom you used to sit in every morning. But something is different now. You notice the thought arriving, the way you would notice weather, and you ask the question that was not available to you before. What am I going to do about it? We began with a story about who was to blame, and we have spent this entire journey replacing it with a better question. You learned that you have been the author of your story all along, even when you were writing yourself as a side character. You felt the pull of blame and learned to name it as a coat you could choose not to wear. You saw that circumstances are information, not sentences, the way Viktor Frankl proved even in the worst conditions a human being can face. You caught the excuse machine mid-sentence and kept moving anyway. You found the half-second where every reaction is actually authored. You picked up the pen on your own identity, the way Mandela did inside walls he never chose. You said the specific, uncomfortable truth out loud instead of the safe general one. You moved before you felt ready, and let the readiness catch up to you. And you learned that none of this is a single dramatic decision. It is a structure, repeated on ordinary days nobody is watching. I want to be honest with you about something before we close. This will not become permanent in a straight line. There will be a Tuesday months from now where the old courtroom reopens and blame feels easier than ownership. That is not failure. That is the pattern reasserting itself, the way every old pattern does, and your job on that day is simply to notice it and choose again. Not perfectly, just again. Here are the principles worth keeping somewhere visible. I am the author, not the character. My reactions are choices, not weather. My circumstances are information, not verdicts. I would rather be honest and uncomfortable than safe and stuck. I move before I feel ready because readiness is a byproduct, not a precondition. I want you to picture the person you are becoming 3 months from now, standing in a moment that would have once produced blame, and instead calmly, almost without effort, asking what is mine to do here. Not a perfect person. Not someone without pain or setbacks. Someone who has simply stopped waiting for permission to take their life back, one ordinary Tuesday at a time. You were never actually a character trapped inside someone else's story. You were an author who had simply put the pen down for a while. Pick it back up. The next page is already waiting on you. If this audiobook gave you something real, subscribe to this channel and stay on this journey with me. The next audiobook goes even deeper into how to rebuild trust in yourself after years of broken promises. Share this with someone who needs it today. And until next time, keep growing, keep choosing, keep becoming.